What if I told you, somewhere among the annals of recent internet history, there lies a fandom so hilariously awful that it might be the worst out there? That's right, worse than furries, worse than bronies, and definitely worse than Roblox transfer games. Yeah, all of what you just saw is based off of real Loud House fan art. And yeah, it does get worse than this. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to your guided tour of the most degenerate fandom on the internet. Oh yeah, by the way, just join the Discord if you want to get sneak peeks and other fun things related to future videos. Or don't, I don't really blame you. In the beginning, there was Chris Savino, a veteran animator and a guy who couldn't control his urge to share his pleasure of working with some of his employees. Until he got caught up sharing his pleasure of working with some of his employees. But, really quickly, let's back up a little bit. The Loud House stars Lincoln, an 11-year-old little menace who lives with his 10 older and younger sisters. Man, I wonder how the internet took this one. Get out of my house! The show dropped in 2016 to pretty high praises, being the first time its host channel, Nickelodeon, actually gave a shit about another cartoon since SpongeBob, but has since fallen off to say the least. Today, you're going to be taken on a journey through the disgusting underbelly of the Loud House, its fandom, to see what hell truly lies beneath. We're going to be discussing why the show has become host to such an awful fandom, as well as some of the art and literature created surrounding the show. Then, I'll be diving into the darker corners of the fandom and the evils it has spawned through the contents of the original show. So, if you're prepared enough to handle it, let's begin, entering the first circle of fandom hell, Limbo.
But really quickly, we have to do Two-Buck Troop Roll Call!
Unusual, Sharps, Bracelet, Yellow, Primiar, Taboo TV Cat, Mast, VR, 2, Frisk, Andy, Rupert, and Limp are here today.
And listen to Two-Buck Troop by using the link in the description.
In Limbo, we're going to discuss the relatively benign things this fandom partakes in, as well as why it has gotten so big in the first place. The fandom has essentially spread its wings over multiple platforms since its inception, and isn't always awful. Anyways, the nicer parts of the fandom are usually found in more public spaces like Twitter. DeviantArt, kinda, where there are actual moderation teams and people who don't like seeing. Usually, most fan art at worst involves creepy self-inserts, but usually is redrawn scenes from the show or putting the characters in new places. That should be about it for Limbo, so let's descend into the next circle. For some reason, there's a large portion of this fan art community that has a strong affinity for drawing the main character, Lincoln, and his sisters in, let's just call them sensual situations. Of course it gets worse than this, but you'd be surprised at the amount of safe work art that really skirts the line between sibling love and incest love. On top of this, there's a whole other side of this art community I'll be showing later. To give you a taste, remember the intro I spent 4 days animating and rendering? Yeah, that barely scratches the surface. The Loud House gore art community is booming. Lori Loud in a horrific car accident here, Lincoln Loud undergoing chemotherapy there, everyone in the Loud family crying because one of the sisters was left with horrific injuries over here, etc, etc. I won't lie, it's kind of funny literally just because of how absurd it is, but then again, there's an entire community of people out there who draw images of 9-year-old cartoon kids getting into bloody and traumatic accidents. Like, imagine if a show like Bluey had a community like this. I don't want to get too carried away, as there's enough of this shit to make an entire ass section going over some of it. Anyways, the next section is one of the most mind-blowingly hilarious things I've ever shown on this channel, and I think you'll agree. When we think of the long-winded epics of fiction, one's mind usually points towards the Epic of Gilgamesh, Homer's Odyssey, War and Peace, or Chris Chan's biography. However, what if I told you the longest work of fiction ever written is a Loud House self-insert fanfiction that has, count them with me, 16,777,215 words at the time of writing. And, believe it or not, it's still being updated regularly, with the most recent edition being from 21 hours ago as of writing this. Note, this section is not meant to bully the creator of his work. I just want to show a particularly amusing part of the fandom that I think really furthers the idea of how insane the whole thing is. Mr. James Dean 5842 is the creator of this masterwork, and at the young and naive age of 36 has managed to create quite the work of fiction here. He also makes sure to specify he never accepts, quote, bad opinions, bad criticism, racial slurs, and hateful comments, which is fair, I guess. I'm sure he's gotten no shortage of those since he began writing this 2,000 chapter epic. Anyways, let's go over part of the story. The story begins with our, at the time, 30-year-old protagonist moving in with his family into their multi-million-dollar mansion in Royal Woods, Michigan. Fortunately for JD here, he bumps into the guy that starts the whole story, Lincoln. He introduces this mysterious man to his entire ass family, and of course he then naturally hits it off with literally every one of Lincoln's sisters, because why not? All the characters do their own thing until talking to JD, where they just respond like robots every single time.
Why, thank you.
I feel like I'm watching an AI interact with itself, but you know. We now discover that the author has, all of a sudden, decided to spawn an 11th sister named Lainey, who likes to paint and shit. He didn't even follow the 4-letter name thing that every other character in the family follows. He continues meeting the sisters one by one until he meets the 16-year-old sister, Lenny. He remarks, "You sure are pretty, Lenny." Alright. In each of the next chapters, he proceeds to awkwardly insert himself into actual episodes from the show. In the second chapter, he makes sure to let us know that although he is 30 in real life, he is 15 in the fanfiction. A 30-year-old man role-playing as a 15-year-old alongside a bunch of underage girls. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, I'm reading this a bit further, and at some point he inserted Ed, and Eddie, and now they all hang out at Lincoln's house. He also has this segment where they view into an alternate gender-bended version of the Loud House where, and I quote, "We saw Lynn Sr. and Rita's counterparts crying as the older boys were taken away in police cars and the younger boys were taken away by child protection services." What? Anyways, skipping ahead 1900 chapters, there isn't a single recognizable character left other than the author and an occasional Loud sister. They visit all kinds of other cartoons, from Dexter's Lab, Into the Spider-Verse, and f***ing Total Drama Island, The Redonkulous Race. And, like I said, it still continues on to this very day, with most of the recent chapters alone having multiple thousands of words. For context, in 2018, the story had 180 chapters, and in 2021, it had 1,300 chapters. In 2 years, this guy's written another 7.5 million words and 850 chapters. And what exactly are you doing with your life? Shit, man, we need my boy James Dean 5842 to finish up Hunter x Hunter. When you think of notoriously bad fan art, what do you think of? My Little Pony? I mean, yeah, you're not entirely wrong, but is it a core staple of that fandom to show bizarre sexual tension between siblings? Yeah, I don't think so. What about Bluey? Is it common for that fandom to produce gruesome images, imagining small children being deathly ill or fatally injured? Yeah, not really. With the Loud House fandom, you get this much and sometimes more, but we'll get into that part later. For now, we'll discuss the art that is often created by viewers who just wish to show their adoration for the children living in the Loud family. As we know, fan art is a controversial concept within many communities, often because those who draw them are not very in touch with basic morality, to say the least. There's a reason the next 3 parts are dedicated to Loud House fan art. I want to prove to you, the viewer, that this fandom may be the worst major community on the internet. Coming from an admittedly poorly made article by AminoApps.com, we can take a look at some of the most vile yet apparently safe for work things the fandom has created. Here, we see a precursor to the images we're going to be purely discussing in the last part. The person who drew this believed so much in the bond between 2 11-year-olds, they drew them snuggling in bed, all whilst Lincoln's 17-year-old sister is menacingly standing over them. Next, another preview at the awful situations these artists put these children in for their own amusement, with this image showing Lincoln's 15-year-old sister piss drunk off of beer and vomiting in a dirty alleyway. Like, how the f do people come up with this shit? Like, I won't lie, in a morbid way, it's kind of funny, but that's just because of how purely absurd it is. Some more lovely art comes from Pinterest. Again, putting this poor, tortured 11-year-old boy into provocative situations. Seriously, just let my boy play Roblox and watch Skibidi Toilet videos. My God. This one shows him being affectionately hugged by Lori's 17-year-old friend, and I don't think she loves him like a brother. There's actually a shocking amount of art between these two specifically for some reason. Here's one of them holding hands and blushing while sitting on a couch, with Lori's friend literally dwarfing him in size. Is this some kind of like mommy issue projection? Here's another one of that girl Ronnie Ann in f***ing booty shorts. Here's one of Lori's friend forcefully kissing Lincoln. Here's one where Lincoln is romantically laying with his sister's lesbian girlfriend. Here's one where Lori is kissing Lincoln. And I'm getting ahead of myself. See what kind of rabbit hole we're in for? And this is just the beginning. There are literally thousands of artworks depicting this kind of psycho shit. But if you can believe it, we've only just skimmed the surface. Violence is probably the most literal of all the circles we've yet discussed. If you weren't aware, people in the Loud House fandom seem to have an affinity for placing its characters into sad and depressing situations, often depicting them as deathly ill, morally wounded, dead, etc. Again, tell me another community that has such a unique issue. To give some more perspective, imagine if there was a large community of people who drew fan art of the Backyardigans featuring Pablo being dropped into a pit of wooden spears. That's what I mean by how insane all this is. Taking a look at this Reddit post where someone has the same question I bet all of you, including myself, are having, we get an answer from this user. Quote, biggest reason behind sad Loud House stuff is a pair of ultra poorly received episodes, Brawl in the Family and No Such Luck, which generally trigger the fan base to hold a grudge against the Loud family and seek to comfort themselves by imagining incredibly angsty situations where Lincoln disowns his own family, runs away, abuses them back, what have you. Generally, not even out of hate for the characters either, because I get the impression most people making this art actually want to evoke sympathy and pity for all involved. The writer continues by saying how this is apparently not an issue unique to the Loud House and shouldn't be seen as such. Although there's some credence to be lended to what the writer is saying here, I simply can't buy the fact that this is Loud House fans secondhand trauma dumping by drawing some child and sibling abuse in Paint.net. On top of that, other kids shows that feature gore or trauma art, let's say SpongeBob for example, feature abstract representations of grown-ass adults, not realistic representations of actual people. It's the fact that so much of this art has been created, often not even featuring Lincoln, that leads me to believe this is just fanboy reasoning. It doesn't have a whole lot of basis behind it. To help illustrate my point, let me introduce you to a 27-chapter, 346,000-word fanfiction about Lincoln being diagnosed with a terminal f***ing illness. Requiem for a Loud is a fanfiction written by some dude from Argentina who decided to write a PhD dissertation on diagnosing cartoon children with neurofibromatosis, aka a deadly brain tumor. I'll quickly skim through this to spare you the ironically decent writing to give you the gist of what happened in this fanfiction. Chapter 1. Lincoln is out playing soccer with his sister, he collapses and has to go to the hospital. Chapter 2. He wakes up in the hospital, is visited by his family, but his parents kick his sisters out because they're being rowdy. Chapter 3. Lincoln's parents spend the night in the hospital with him, where they tell his sisters he has brain tumors because of an inherited genetic disease, and he's told he has 3 weeks to live. Chapter 4. Nothing happens, blah 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 something. Chapter 27. Consummatum est, which means it is finished in Latin. Wow. Lincoln talks to his family and says he loves them and then falls asleep and dies. Apparently the Loud House fandom ate this shit up because even before researching this video, I've actually heard whispers of it in various places. Anyways, let's move on to the visual art side of the fandom, where we can see scenes like this in vivid deviant art quality. In this image, we see the Loud family undergoing lots of suffering. It starts relatively minor with Lisa having a failed explosion or experiment, the twins getting into a fight, Lucy being sad, Lincoln breaking a stuffed animal, and then Lynn has a bent leg, Luana's having her reputation ruined. Hey, we've seen this one before. Luna has alcohol poisoning from binge drinking, Lenny's been stabbed by glass or something, and Lori's on the verge of death. Like, this guy made a medieval triptych version of Loud House fan art. We get to see all of them needlessly suffering for some reason. Wow, look at that! A fully realized reenactment of the pain and suffering experienced by the Loud family during Lincoln's final moments from Requiem for a Loud. If we keep looking, we see Lincoln with fatal head trauma, Lincoln getting into a fatal car crash with Lori, Lola visiting the grave of her twin sister, and it just continues on forever. There's no end to the suffering this family experiences in various iterations upon the core show. Whatever conclusions you may reach about the show's fandom though, we haven't even reached the bottom of the barrel yet. Stay tuned, where we'll be diving into how disgusting this fandom can truly get on the unsupervised corners of the internet. as of now, you, the viewer, are standing on the precipice of a terrifyingly deep pit of immorality and flat-out illegality. Before we take the jump, allow me to guide you along the edge of the canyon, giving you a hint of what's to come. If I haven't hinted at it enough, the art that many people in this fandom creates involves putting underage characters, sometimes even family members, in sensually tense environments. Let's go over how deep this rabbit hole travels into the various dark and gross corners the surface of this fandom has to offer. For an example of something actually official in the show, that even a distant observer would notice, is the strange relationship between Lincoln's 11-year-old friend, Clyde, and his own 17-year-old sister. And they actually kind of play it off as normal. Look, I don't know about you, but to write such a weird thing into a kid's show, especially with the creator himself being a woman toucher, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, they could have toned down the whole bloody nose thing, or at the bare minimum made this kid attracted to someone his own age. Like, shit, we don't need representation for most underage Twitter furries. Anyways, moving away from the official shit, all you have to do to enter the cesspool of art and fanfiction is by searching up, quote, Loud House Ship. In the world of fan art, there are 3 categories here. 1. In-show canon relationships. Obviously, most of these are like actually morally acceptable, like characters dating other characters their own age. Crazy, right? Number 2. Pudding. I shit you not, specifically one sister, Luann, with that random background character from a single episode into a lesbian relationship. Even generically searching up Loud House Ship yields so many results between these 2 characters. I was honestly dumbfounded. I figured, eventually it'll stop. Nope, it just keeps going. Number 3. Shipping Lincoln with his own 13-year-old sister. Yeah, while also showing them as having kids. Again, name another show as mainstream as this with a fandom this insane. Delving into the fanfiction side of things, there's no shortage of content involving more underage characters enjoying each other's company. Again, just look up Loud House fanfiction. The first result is a story called Shipping War. Our author places a strong emphasis on puberty and its effects, and how he's now 13 years old, also making him irresistible to the other 13-year-old girls around him. Yeah, I don't know about you, it feels weird seeing what is probably an adult write about young teenagers experiencing romance, especially a kid's show. Basically, this whole thing turns out to be the equivalent of a harem anime, but written by a lonely adult man, so you can just about assume where that goes. Oh, we're not done yet, though. I've got one more story to torture you with. Here's another fanfiction called Ship Shape. Can you guess what this one's about? A story where Lincoln has some form of sensual or sexually tense interaction with almost every one of his sisters. Here are some excerpts if you're curious. Very funny, Lori, Lincoln called back. Put me down, he was blushing. Lori loved it when he blushed. Lori could tell his heart wasn't in it, however. His eyes were locked on her breasts, as they should be. Dude, she's 17 years old. Like, what do I even say about this? Lincoln agreed, unable to take his eyes off his bouncing sister, specifically the parts that were bouncing. And then we can have... Again, bro, this girl is 16 talking to her 11-year-old brother. Speaking of, later in the story, we get these bone-chilling words. Little help, Link? Luna asked. Feels like I'm not doing it right. Just put your arms around my waist. Alright, what's next? What? I don't even want to do this one. Here, AI Mark Zuckerberg, read this one for me.
At 14 years old, Lola Loud looked like she had been purposefully constructed to be the first thing to show up when jailbait was entered into a search engine, a fact that had aided the FBI countless times without her knowledge, contrasted sharply with the shapely hips and full breasts that were commonly enjoyed by the women of the Loud family.
I think I've given enough examples, and I'm sure you're done listening to this, but if you've forgotten, then let me remind you, this is the surface of what's to come. So, if you want to get even darker, stay tuned, and we'll be staring the devil right in the face. You can probably already guess what I've been alluding towards this whole video. If you haven't realized it yet, the Loud House fandom has created a large volume of inappropriate images involving children, often combining themes of abuse, among other things. This side of the fandom doesn't hold back either, including all of the sisters and other kids in the town from ages 17 years old to 15 months. I don't think you need to even see blurred examples as proof, nor do I really want to see those images either, but to give you some context on how bad this is, let's play a game of numbers. On a website dedicated to a certain internet rule, searching the Loud House yields a grand total of 7,500 results. A children's show comprised primarily of children, with 7,500 NSFW images of it produced. On another website I discovered while doing my searches that I will not name due to the entire point of the website being underage art, there are 16,000 results. I cannot stress to you how big of a thing this is in the fandom, and while it may not be the majority of people within it, the sheer volume of these works is not few enough to just ignore. If the few and the proud within the Loud House fandom end up seeing this video, I can almost guarantee the argument about it being a small part of the fandom that we do not agree with will come up. And while you may not be wrong in the objective sense, the fact this type of art is so voluminous compared to other fandoms is the true issue here. Just like that Reddit guy mentioned SpongeBob, let's see how the volume of SpongeBob NSFW compares to the Loud House. On the first website I mentioned, the number sits around 3,000. That means that a show, in total, that has existed for 3 times longer and has a consumer base of billions, has less than half the artwork of a show that's been around for 7 years and is primarily made for an American audience. To reiterate, it's more of a macro scale trend thing than on an individual scale. Remember, this video is about the fandom as a whole, so I've covered it as a whole. This video isn't meant to discuss the inner workings of Loud House internet politics and to discuss the nuance of a misunderstood fandom or something. And, although I understand very well this type of stuff the general fandom doesn't tolerate, I'm making a video to bring awareness to this kind of stuff, since based on my research, only a select few cartoon YouTubers have discussed this fandom at any sort of depth, usually staying on the surface of the fandom. And I know this is a wild time to plug, but if you want to see content where I venture to and discuss places where most YouTubers wouldn't even think about venturing to, drop a sub and share the video around so more people can learn about what happens behind the scenes in the Loud House fandom. To most, The Loud House is a fairly average show about growing up in a big family, with all of them learning how to treat people with kindness and respect. But peek behind the veil and you'll see much more than what you expected to. Weird fan fiction, art, and borderline illegal content that is readily accessible to anyone with the ability to type on a keyboard. Fortunately though, I think a lot of things to talk about. I have some ideas for the next iteration of Fallen Fandoms, but I'll let you guys decide when that time comes. Anyways, thanks for suffering through this video with me, and I'll see you in the next one.